Now we're going to move on to back and Siman Reish Zayin to Sa'ifim Hevav and Zayin, which are more connected to Hilchas Ribis and also connected to Hilchas Ribis, also connected to Tanai and Mechira. And we will deal with this. It's a little bit of a longer shir, so we're starting earlier to be able to finish this topic and move on weiter. We'll start with the Tur. And we'll do the Seder. Is going to be the Tur, Shulchan Aruch, some of the Neisikelim on Shulchan Aruch, and then we're going to move to Yeridea, Alter Rebbe and Hilchas Ribis and Hilchas Shabbos, then it's Tzemach Tzedek on Hilchas Ribis. So the Tur writes in what we'll call the parallel to Sif Vav and Sif Zayin, that if somebody sells karka, somebody sells land to a buyer, that means the seller sells to a buyer a piece of land. Now, by the way, there's a bunch of Mefarshim would say that when it comes to these things, there's no difference if it's land or it's metaltalin, doesn't make a difference what it is. But let's just stay with what the Torah says. It sold a piece of land, and the moicher made a condition at the time of the sale that the seller has to return to him the field at the moment that he has the money. He has money. Which means the only reason he's selling it now is because he's broke and he needs money. But down the line, he's going to be rich, or he's going to have money, and then he's going to be able to refund the money that he purchased and take back the field. The Torah says it's a valid Tanai, and when time comes, he has to refund him the land. That means the seller has to give back the land, he gets back the money, he has to give back the land. Therefore, as a result of that, the leikeach, the buyer, is not allowed to have any enjoyment from the field, not allowed to eat any of the fruits from the field. Why? Because essentially it is ribis. It's not a sale, it is a loan. Which means the seller is borrowing from the buyer a certain amount of money, and he's taking that amount of money as a loan, and he's giving his land as a collateral, and then down the line he's going to pay back the loan. But if he's going to enjoy any fruits from it, then he is, if the buyer, who is essentially the lender in this case, is going to receive at the end of the deal all his money back, plus for a few years he ate the fruits, then it's getting ribis. Therefore it's asur.
So that's considered ribis.
That's a discussion in Yeridea. And now, but if the seller did not make this deal melchatchila, but the seller, from his own will and accord, turns to the buyer and he tells the buyer, you know what? It means the buyer sells him the field. And then he tells him, exactly when, that's also part of the discussion, but he tells him, from his own will and accord, if you want, at some point, if you're going to have the money, don't worry about it. I know you're very attached to your field, so down the line, if you have the money, I'll sell it, I'll sell it back to you, I'll give it back to you, whichever l'sheinis. It's all these are nafkaminas. Then, or if the buyer heard the deal, heard the Tanai from the seller, but he tells the seller, I hear you. At the time when you'll have the money, I'll make my determination. Maybe I'll give it back to you, maybe not. That means it depends on him. Then it's not considered as a valid Tanai. The Torah writes it's not considered a valid Tanai, which means that the buyer is not obligated to give back the field. Why is that? First of all, you all remember from the beginning of the Siman that if a buyer makes a Tanai, it's Pitum Mila B'alma, that's the shit of the Rosh. And the Torah obviously follows the shit of the Rosh. So therefore, the fact that he said it's not enough that he should be able to go to Bezdin and force it. And the same thing if he tells him, I'm taking the deal, and I will think about it when the time will come. Again, he cannot take it out of him in Bezdin, and therefore he could enjoy all the fruits during that time. And it's not considered ribis, even if down the line he's going to go, and when the money is going to be returned, he's going to give him back the land. because even though there was a commitment, the commitment is not a mandatory commitment. And the second option is bechal not a commitment. He tells him, I'll think about it. I'll think about it, that's not a commitment. The Beis Yosef brings, over there the Beis Yosef right away brings the Gemara from where it's based on. He brings the explanation of Rashi and the Rosh, the difference between the first case, where the Moicher made the Tanai and the Lekech was maskim to the Tanai, and therefore there's Ribis. And the second case, according to Rashi, the difference is because it all boils down and depends on the decision of the seller, of the buyer down the line. So then we consider the end of the term. If the buyer will agree at that point to give it back to him, it is not considered as a refund and a cancellation of the original sale, but rather it is considered a new sale, a second sale. So therefore it's mutter. Why? According to Rashi, because you can't force him, since you cannot force him in Bezdin to sell it back to him or to give it back to him, so it's considered a second sale, and therefore it's not the Ribis. And, what? That's in Sif Hey. Sif Vav is without a time. We're going to get to Sif Hey soon. I'm just focusing, We'll get to Sif Hey when we get to Shulchan Aruch. I don't want to focus on the Torah when it comes to Sif Hey. I just want to stick with the Torah, only Sif Vav and Zayin. According to the Rosh and the Baal HaTrumas, that's how the Beis Yosef brings, that they actually did make a deal, the buyer and the seller, but the buyer said, I might change my mind down the line, and that's why in the second case it's mutter, because the buyer depended on his own logic. So according to Rashi, it depends on whether he could be forced or not in Bezdin to do it. In other words, if he could be forced to give back the land, and then it's considered a cancellation of the original sale, and therefore any fruits eaten is ribis. And if he cannot be forced, according to Rosh, it's slightly different. It's not about forcing, it's about does it depend on the buyer or does it depend on the seller? If it boils down to the seller's decision, then it's ribis. If it boils down to the buyer's decision, then it's not ribis. Continues the Beis Yosef over there and brings also from the Rif, in Tshuva, that there is no difference if the deal was made by the seller or the deal was made by the buyer who offered the deal. The only difference is whether the deal was, the Rif is interesting, whether the deal was made from the onset. That means if the deal was made at the time of the sale, doesn't make a difference who offered the deal, whether the buyer or the seller. If the deal was made at the time of sale, that means it's attached to the sale, then it's also, it's considered, then it becomes ribis if he uses anything. But if the deal is that this will be determined at the end of the term, that means when I will have money, I will come and have a conversation with you, and at that point, we will deal with it. Even if that's the deal that they're going to deal with it at the end, it's not considered according to the Rif Ribis, even if they made an agreement from the beginning. Why? Because that shows that the first sale is valid and the second sale is not. Tur then continues in what's parallel to Sif Zayin and brings the Rambam. What does the Rambam say? The Rambam says if the seller sells it without any attached deal, and the buyer comes and says to the seller, if you want, and you have money down the line, I will refund you, I will give you back the field, and you give back the money. The Rambam says it's not considered even a vak ribis, and he can enjoy any fruits he wants, because the buyer is the one who offered it. But it's still a Tanai. That's the Rambam says. What does it mean it's still a Tanai? That's where the Tur gets all confused. And the Tur says, I don't understand. If the Tanai still is valid, which means that he has to give back the field, then the Lekech is not allowed to eat any fruits. It's considered ribis. So how can you say that mitzad echad he's allowed to eat the fruits, not even avak ribis? Mitzad chain, it's still a Tanai and he has to give him back the field? Therefore the Torah says, cannot follow the Rambam. Comes the Beis Yosef and says, take it easy, Tur. The Rambam is not so confusing. We could understand the Rambam. The Rambam's logic is that even though it is a Tanai, but being that the sale was completed first, whichever way it was done, that means the buyer bought the field. And then the buyer turns to the seller and tells him, if you want, you could always refund it. So then, what happens afterwards, according to the Rambam, is a new sale. It's a Tanai that has to be fulfilled, that there's going to be another sale down the line. But the first sale happened. Then comes the buyer and says, we have a deal that down the line I'm going to give you another sale.
They did a king sudor on that deal, so they did a king sudor on that tonight, so the time king sudor, they have to fulfill this. Right?
Yeah, they have to fulfill the schayvos, whether it's at night, whether it's a shtar, we're going to lav dafka do exactly what forces the second night.
It wasn't attached to the sale.
It wasn't attached to the sale. Because it happened as two separate transactions. Therefore, according to the Rambam, it's muter. The lekeach afterwards comes and says whatever he wants to say. He's being nice, he's offering him a good deal. And the B'siyasa then says, I found the same thing in the Goyes Hashri, and it's a good pirush. The Darkei Moshe brings also this Goyes Hashri. And he says, he doesn't define it like the B'siyasa, that it's a second sale, but he defines it as a matana. That means first is a sale. And afterwards, whatever happens afterwards, it's a gather of a commitment for a matana, and therefore it is muter according to the Rambam. The Drisha says, no, that's not the logic of the Rambam. The Drisha / the Smeh. Yeah, it says not the logic of the Rambam. The Drisha says that what's the logic of the Rambam? That being that it all boils down to the das of the lekeach, and the lekeach is the one who bought it, and then the lekeach is the one who offered this commitment, which means it all still remains on das lekeach. According to the Rambam, as long as it's totally in das lekeach, it's muter. This Tanai is a valid Tanai according to the Rambam, and the lekeach is mandated and obligated to fulfill this Tanai because he said so, and he committed to do so. It's still as if he told them that it's totally bedaite. It's not that he actually said, I will make a decision later. But because he's the one who offered it afterwards, it's compared to as if he said, I will make a decision later. Elamai, instead of making a decision later, made a decision now. But still, it's a decision of the buyer, not the decision of the seller. And that decision was done after the sale was completed, and therefore it's muter. But what is muter? He says the Rambam is careful. The Rambam wants to make sure that you understand. The only thing that's muter here is eating the fruits. Why? Because it's a sale and another sale. It doesn't mean that down the line, why does the Rambam want to tell you tonight? To tell you that down the line, the buyer cannot come and then say, I changed my mind again. It's totally b'das lekeach. I want to change my mind, I don't want to give you back the field. No, you made a commitment, you have to keep the commitment. So Tanoi Kayam, Misnayas Kayam, when it's connected to Karka, to the return of the field. But regarding the fruits, it's not considered ribis. And he says, the Trisha says this, even if the Lekeach made a kinyan, Gomor Agav Sudar on the tonight, everything he did it the best possible way that he can't back out of it. Now, this is the Tur, the Trisha, the B'siyasa. There's a short Tzemach Tzedek in Piskedinim. It's in your book. There's no. It's not in the booklet you have. It's in the spiral, but you'll get to it later on this Nakuda. That what the B'siyasa says in explaining the Rambam. What's the logic of the B'siyasa in explaining the Rambam? That the lekeach the buyer tells the seller, when you have money, I will sell it to you. Right? That's how the B'siyasa explains it. It becomes a second sale. The Rambam, the way the B'siyasa explains the Rambam is that it becomes a second sale. You committed to it, you committed to it. So now the Tzemach Tzedek says, Kum ta'os, that if the buyer, when he made the second deal, told him Me'achshav, so then it doesn't help anything. Because even though the sale is later, he already told him Me'achshav, which means that when the money is going to be refunded, even though it's a second sale, Lemafreya went back to the date when they made the kinyan. and therefore any fruits he ate afterwards is back to a problem of ribis. So Tzemach Tzedek says it only works if you don't say me'achshav. So then Tzemach Tzedek says, okay, so you don't say me'achshav. If you don't say me'achshav, how could you make a kinyan on a Tanai? According to B'si Yosef, B'chlal. A kinyan on the future doesn't work. It's me'achshav. We already know that because we're going to it later on in the Siman. So he says, Tzemach Tzedek says, no, there's another way of explaining it. This is an interesting chap from the Tzemach Tzedek. The koine was mischayev me'achshav, he's going to do the sale later. So it's not that not that the kinyan happened on the karka me'achshav. Me'achshav became a kinyan, and this chayev was that I'm going to do something down the line. But Tzemach Tzedek says that's tzarich. He's not so comfortable with his explanation, with this interesting chiluk, that I'm making me'achshav on a sale that's going to, my commitment, but not on the actual act that's going to result as my commitment. He says it's an interesting explanation, but tzarich. Okay, that's to conclude the tour. Let's move on to the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, the middle of Sif Hey, the Mechaber says that if you are makna something to somebody that's not in the white booklet, it's still in Yeridea, in Choshen Mishpat, in Sif Hey, in the Siman, in Reish Zayin. The Mechaber says if you are makna something to your friend for a specific amount of time, a time frame, and you tell him after a certain amount of time, let's say in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 1 year from now, whatever the time is, 4 years from now, at that point I will give you back the money and you will give me back my field. Or he tells him, I will pay you by a certain time. The Tanai is Kayam, the Mekach is a Mekach, and down the line, when the Tanai is fulfilled, you will return him the field. That's when Sif Hayden says the Mechaber comes, and Sif Vav, the Mechaber says, if the seller makes a Tanai, this is what we learned already in the tour, but the Mechaber L'Shitasi, the way he understands the B'si Yosef, that's how he frames the halachas over here. He says, if the Moicher sells a field, and he's the one who offers the deal, when I'll have money, I will buy it back from you, and that's part of the deal. Then, when he has money, the seller gets back the field. The buyer gets back his money. And it's a Tanai. And therefore, it's also for him to eat the fruits. Why? Because the money he gave became alva. And therefore, the fruits are ribis. That's in Sif Vav. Sif Zayin, as continues the Mechaber. And this is where he brings what the Rambam says. Now, if the Moicher was Moicher B'stam, and without saying anything, and the Lekeach then goes and offers Midaitai from his own will and accord, when you will have money, I will refund you the field, and you will refund me the money. The Tanai is a Tanai. And the fruits, he's allowed to eat. Why? Because the Lashon of the Mechaber is, Me'atzmoi chiev atzmoi b'tnai zeh. Because you, the Lekeach, made this decision from your own mind that you're going to do it, therefore it's mutter. So, mamash, like he explains, a summary of the B'si Yosef. Shulchan Aruch summarized what he wrote in the B'si Yosef. It all boils down to the decision according to the Rambam. It's totally b'daitai. Now comes the Smeh. The Smeh we already know from the Drisha and Prisha, what he holds over here. And he actually writes the explanation on Sif Hey. On Sif Hey, he writes his whole pilpul. He says, based on the way the Shulchan Aruch frames it, that when you sell it for a specific amount of time, then the mechira is a mechira and the t'nai is a t'nai. It's mashma that until that time, when the expiration date, it's a full mechira. And therefore the Smeh adds, based on the Mechaber, you could also eat the fruits during those 3 years or 4 years or 1 year, whatever the time frame is. And he could have any enjoyment that he wants from what he bought. And then afterwards, they'll give it back to him. So if he gives it back to him and doesn't make any money, doesn't get back the refund, it's for sure mutter. Mashkanta de surah. And if he gets back a full refund at the end of the 3 years, and he still ate fruits, he says, according to the Rosh, this is how he understands it, and others, that in Hilchas Ribis they're Oyser, over here they're Mater. Why would they be Mater here? Because being that a Mechire Lizman, this was structured as a Mechire and not as Alva, Elamai, it was a Kinyan Gomor for a specific time frame, therefore it's Mutter. But in Sivav, where there is no time frame, and he tells him, whenever I will have money, I will go and I'll take it back, then over there it's not it's Bichlal not a sale. It's Alva. And because it's Alva, it's Aser. That's how he explains, and that's how he explains why, even if you get a full refund at the end of the time frame, it's still mutter. Taz writes on it over here in Sivav, means this smears on Sif Hey. Taz on Sivav writes on this, and he adds to it. He says, the Smer just confused himself for no reason. The first in Sif Hey is simple, Sivav is simple, you don't have to mix the two together. Sif Hey is not talking about eating fruits, the Smer didn't have to add the whole eating ribis into it. Sif Hey is only talking about the sale for a certain amount of time. He's not going Bechlal into the eating fruits. The eating fruits, Shail of ribis is in Sivav. In Sif Hey, he only talked about the condition, that the condition is valid when you make a T'nai with a sale for a certain amount of time. And the only thing the Mechaber wants to emphasize to you is that a sale for a certain amount of time, the buyer cannot afterwards come and say, oh, it's an asmachta, you're not getting back your field. Yes, but mitzad shaila of ribis is for sure aser. The fruits are for sure aser. Well, that's a separate discussion. There's ways to solve that, which is explained in Yeridea. But when it comes to this sif, the Mechaber is not talking in Sifei B'chlal about eating the fruits, about ribis. He's talking only about avoiding an asmachta. This Siman Reish Zayin is about asmachtas and kinyonim, not about ribis. The ribis is a sidebar discussion. We already mentioned it, so we'll deal with it. So we mention it. The Nesivis in Biurim Sifkot and Vav brings what he wrote in Yeridea and Siman Kufa and Dalet. Now, you all know what's ever the Nesivis wrote in Yeridea. Everybody knows it. Chavazdas. Same person. You have to remember the names of the people. This you'll see the same thing as in Chavazdas, and if I recall correctly, also in Mekir Chaim and Hilchas Pesach, which also deals with these things, you have a similar idea in Tafam Ches. I didn't double check it there. So Nesivis in Biurim Sifkot and Vav says, I already explained in Chavazdas and Yeridea, Siman Kufa and Dalet, that we have to look at what the Moicher told the Lekeach. What was the lashon of the deal at the time of the deal?
Which goes back to the Chavazdas and
Kuf Samachalef, and it goes back also to Hilchas Pesach. Because in Hilchas Pesach, it all depends on when you give chametz to a goy. If you sell a goy, that's where it all begins.
How you say it.
How you say it, yeah. And the Alter Rebbe also goes into the Tafam Ches a little bit.
Yeah, but Alter Rebbe doesn't.
A little bit goes into, he doesn't agree with it. Alter Rebbe is a different way. The Alter Rebbe is closer to the way in Hilchas Pesach closer to the Sman, and Chassid is totally more extreme. Yeah. So Chavazdas says it all depends on the lashon that you say. If you say al menas, I'm selling it to you al menas, that you're going to give it back to me, then the mechira is a complete mechira. Why? He didn't say bitnai. He said al menas. It's so that you shall do down the line, kach v'kach. So then the mechira is a mechira gemura. The t'nai is a separate thing that the lekeach is obligated to do it. When the seller will give back the money and the buyer will want to give back the field, the first sale is not canceled. Therefore, the buyer has to make a kinyan to transfer the field back to the seller. It's not a retraction, a cancellation of the first one. But if the seller says, I'm selling it to you, and when I'll have money, you'll give it back to me, without saying al menas, then, since it's all one sentence, it's not two transactions, so when he has money, the transaction gets canceled retroactively, and there's no need for a new kinyan, and therefore whatever he enjoys is ribis. And he says, and after I saw Machne Ephraim, and I was happy that I saw that he writes the same thing.
You're saying that if he says Amanas, then it's a legit kinyan with an additional.
An additional legit Tanai that came afterwards.
If there's no Amanas, then when he does have the money, it's a retracted.
It retracted, yeah, because then it's all one sentence. That's how the Chavas Das / Nesivis explains it, and the Chavas Das mentions it in a few places, and in the Nesivis he only mentions it here because it's the only place it comes up. The Mechaber in Sif Zayin, we already know, he brings what the Rambam says. And we already know that he bases it on how he understands the Rambam, the way he explains it in Beis Yosef. The Smeh, who already explained, disagreed with the Beis Yosef slightly on understanding the Rambam when he writes on the Tur, on the Prisha, comes back here and writes it in short also again. And he says, first of all, I already explained in Prisha how to explain the Rambam a little bit different than the Beis Yosef. Now, and he says, what does it depend on? The Smeh over here explains it slightly different than the slightly different way he explained it in the Prisha and Drisha also. And he says, what are we talking about over here? When the Tanai was done. If the Tanai was done before Kinyan, that means the buyer wanted to sell it. The Moicher then comes and offers him this refund option. But it's all done before their first Kinyan. So then, since the Moicher is the one who said the Tanai, not if Lokech says the Tanai, if the Moicher is the one who says the Tanai before the first Kinyan, there's a clear Gilui Das that he's not selling. He says, I'm selling it to you, but this is the Tanai. So therefore it's for sure Asar according to the Rambam. Because it's Mamash Alva. It's Alva with the Tanai. But if the Kohen is the one who makes the Tanai, so it doesn't make a difference when it happens, according to the Rambam. The Smeh writes. It doesn't really make a difference, according to the Rambam. Why? Because if the seller would have a svara that he's going to sell it on condition, he would have said it. The Maise, he didn't say anything. That means from the Moicher's point of view, I'm completely nisyash from the sale, from this field. You want to offer me something? Shkoyach Gadol. There's no chashash ribis and you can enjoy it. The Taz says that, again, you don't have to get confused with the Rambam. The Rambam had a totally different girsa in the Gemara, and that's why everything works out. And Bechlal, you don't have to follow the Rambam. The Rambam is a Das Yachid. We follow the Rosh. The Rosh who says that any Tanai the Moicher does is Petum and Milu B'Alma, and therefore it's all good. Okay, now we're going to move to Hilchos Ribos. You could look in the booklets that I gave you, these ones. Yeah. Start Siman Kuf Ayin Daled. Yeridei Siman Kuf Ayin Daled. Comes in Mechaber and says, if you sell a field to your friend, and you tell him it means the seller tells the buyer, when I will have money, you will give me back the field. Then he says, Loi kana. The buyer didn't actually buy anything. And therefore, any fruits that he will enjoy during that time are ribis ktsutza. Means ribis deraisa, straight up ribis deraisa. And then comes the Ramah and says, he doesn't even have to make the deal. If the minig in town is that every sale has a refund clause, you don't even have to say it. If the minig in town is that every sale gets refunded if you have money, and there's never a complete sale in this town. Every seller sells on with the understanding that if I'll have money, I'll get it back. So therefore, it's also, and it's ribis. So it's ribis. So it means yotz b'dayanim, that you could take it in Bezdin. But comes Knisim Mechaber, if the Moicher was Moicher b'stam. Yeah, and then the Lekeach says, Midaitoi, from his own opinion, when you will have money, I will refund you the land. The Mechaber says, Ein it Tanai, it's not considered a Tanai B'chlal. And the sale is a sale. Why is it not considered a Tanai? Shach right away says, because since the seller is not the one who made the Tanai, only the buyer does not, so it's Bechal garnished. Therefore, the Lekeach could eat any fruits that he wants, and it's not considered ribis. And then the Mechaber says, but what happens if after the Lekeach offers the deal, the Moicher comes and says, yes, it's a great deal, let's go about it. He's mechazek the words of the seller. Then we're back to square one. Now it's a Tanai of the Moicher also. If it's a Tanai of the Moicher, it goes back to being ribis. The Taz right away over here in Sifkot and Aleph says, since the Mechaber uses the words ribis ktsutza, which is lashon deiraisa, it's obvious that he holds that even when you only have tzad echad beribis, which means you have only ribis that might only coming from one side, that only could happen. It's not for sure it's going to happen. It's not a commitment from both sides. It's only if it will happen. This might happen. It's still asur deraisa. And he says there's a machlekes, Tur and others about this, that there are those that hold that it is only avak ribis. And he says he explains it in a different place. The Shach on the words ribis ktsutza says, not so fast. A lot of people hold that it's avak ribis, not ribis ktsutza. That's the mashmos of the Ramah and Siman Kufayim Beis and in other places. And the reason why the Ramah didn't bother to say, hey, it's not ribis ktsutza, it's only avak ribis, is because he's relying that you already know what was done before, what he wrote to Simanim earlier. So therefore, he doesn't have to tell you here, but it's clear that he doesn't hold it's ribis ktsutza. Geshmak Rabbi Kiva Eger over here, that seems like he's making peace between all these opinions, and he says, it's both. When you do the sale, it's avak ribis. Why? Because lav dafka it's going to happen. So now it's only derabbanan. When the sale gets refunded at the end of the deal, it becomes ribis ktsutza. Retroactively became ribis ktsutza. That's Rabbi Kiva Eger's view on this. So it's avak ribis which becomes ribis ktsutza. The Pischei Tshuva and Sifkot and Aleph over here also told you today. I bring some Tshuva Neda B'Yehuda. He says, Lulei de mistafina, if I wouldn't be scared, I would say that we have to look at the lashonos that were said at the sale. Not like the Sivis, but a different way of different lashonos. Unless the seller says clearly that when I will give you back the money, the mechira will be batel mafreya. If he doesn't say those words, then it's mutter. Only if he says the words, when I'll give you back the money, I'm retroactively canceling the sale, then it's asur mitzad ribis. But if he says, when I'll give you back the money, you'll sell it back to me, then it's for sure mutter. It's considered a full mechira. It's not even tzad echad beribis, he says. But it's only lula de mistafina. The Chavas Das takes this approach. He says l'chatchila. He says that this is mamash like that. Unless you say specific lashon, then it's for sure not a problem. That's for sure not a problem. That's the first thing that he mentions. But as lula de mistafina, there are some poskim today would say the lula de mistafina of the Neda B'Yehuda is good enough to be matir, especially with the Chavas Das. There are some that say, no, the fact that the Neda B'Yehuda says lula de mistafina means that it's something you can't rely on. B'chal. He says a good svara, but it's a svara that I'm scared of saying it. So if the Neda B'Yehuda was scared, for sure we should be scared of it. Sifkot and Beis, Pischei Tshuva brings some Tshuva Beis Ephraim, where he says there's a svara. The Beis Ephraim says a svara that we already know from the Smeh. What's in the Smeh in Choshen Mishpat? What's the svara? That if you sell it for a certain amount of time, a time frame, you're allowed to eat fruits. But to stam mechira without a specific amount of time when they're going to refund the money is asur. And the Beis Ephraim says this is a svara, but I don't agree with it. And it's asur. But this is what we're going to see in Yeridei. Now you can continue in the booklet, you'll turn the page, another page, and you'll see what the Alter Rebbe says, starting from Seif Nun Dalet. Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Ribos deals with it in Seif Nun Dalet after he goes through the whole Schiros and Seif Nun Dalet by fifth word. Alter Rebbe says like this: Avol b'mecher, when they're talking about a sale with the option of refund. Im hamoicher masnim alekeach, if the seller makes a deal with the lekeach, sheyuchal livdois mimkoroi, that he's able to take back his, to not livdois means to reacquire what he sold. Kashiyu leimois, when he'll have money. Yeah, that's the first thing the Alter Rebbe says. So first of all, masne. The Alter Rebbe says stam masne. Doesn't mention kinyan, doesn't mention almanas, doesn't mention l'shainis. Across the board aser. Yeah, so we're going to see what it's aser. Yeah, and this is the halacha that we know. Oy la'achar zman ploini, or he tells him after a certain amount of time. So this is not like the סימן Choshen Mishpat, rather closer to the way the Taz understands it in Yeridei, and Taz and Choshen Mishpat, and the Beis Ephraim and the Pesach Tshuva. Ein ze mecher gomor. It's not a complete sale. What does it mean it's not a complete sale? So he doesn't say it's not a sale b'chlal. It's not a complete sale. What does it mean it's not a complete sale? It's like a tzadechad beribis. It's like a partial. We're not sure. So that's so far. Now, before we continue with, and now, so and there, then Alter Rebbe says, Ein ze mecher gomor ela hamois en balvo. Eitzel halekech lecher, it's supposed to be tzal moicher. The money is a loan. The asur loy lishtamish b'mikchoy, and it's asur. We're going to get to the asur. It's asur for him to use it or to rent it out. Same thing as peiris. Kozman shlei b'dona moicher, as long as the moicher did not come back and pay for it, whether it's lizman, whether it's open-ended. Mipnei shehi ribis gmura. It says ribis gmura. It doesn't say ribis gmura midiraisa. But let's, before we be a few more diuk over here, turn to 3 pages later to Hilchos Pesach. And even though I put Sif, turn to the 2nd page of Hilchos Pesach. Seif Chaf Aleph. If he tells the guy, he tells him, if I sell it to you, that when you will have money, when I will have money, he sells the guy chametz. This is Erev Pesach. He goes to the guy, he says, I'm selling you the chametz, almanas, or he does use the word almanas. Yeah? That when I will have money to buy it back from you, I will buy it back from you. Ein zu mechira klal. First difference between here and Hilchos Ribos. Hilchos Ribos says, Ein ze mecher gomor. It doesn't say Ein ze mechira klal. Here it's bechal not a mechira. Afim nasan l'nachar called mea chametz, even if he gives him all the money of the chametz. Sharei bechol yoim v'yoim mea pesach im yova Yisrael live this chametz enachar yochal akav yodei. Why? Because each and every day, because there's no ending time. So each and every day, the Jew could technically come back and buy back the chametz. Nimtza she'ena chametz kol nachri klal. So it was never sold to the guy. Ve'einei kishaloi mamish, and it's b'chol not his. Leficha chametz zeh, therefore it's chametz asabano. So this is Sifra Aleph. Avo, but im Omar lo yam nasher tachzirei li la'achal ha'pesach. But if he tells him, I'm selling it to you on condition that you will refund me the chametz after Pesach, I'll refund you the money. It means it was a time frame. Kevon shekol yemei Pesach lahoyem mechuyev lachzirei la'Yisrael, being that during the whole time of Pesach it was still before the expiration date of the sale. Hareu kesheloi mamish, it's completely the guys. Kol yemei Pesach, all the days of Pesach. Olefichach, and therefore la'achar Pesach mutar. It's mutar. Afilu ba'achila, it's not even, forget about it. No, even ba'achila it's mutar. Kevon shelo yovar olav Yisrael ba'al yiroi ba'al yematzah. because the Yisrael did not do any Aveda with it. It's also, we're soon going to see why. It's also for midin chametz, not midin anything else. So here, first of all, we see that Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Pesach takes the approach of the Sma in Choshen Mishput. If it's for time, it's for sure a complete sale. And if it's not for time, the problem is because you could always refund it. So this is how the Alter Rebbe looks in Hilchos Pesach. What does he say in Sif? The Alter Rebbe says, K'moshe Nisbar. K'moshe Nisbar is Sif Yutches, which is in the previous page, which is why I gave it to you. Yeah, over here he says that in Chumras Chametz, the Chachamim were machmir on certain l'shenas that could mean that. Why did l'chatchila also? Because we're machmir that you shouldn't say something which could imply you're going to get it back. But the Alter Rebbe concludes Sif Yutches and says, "Ve'in lilmid mikanim kamis achayim." The fact that we're machmir here in Chametz is not a lesson for anywhere else. So and here the Alter Rebbe is more mekel than Chassidus. But over here he says, don't learn from here where I'm machmir for anywhere else. The chumrat, you shouldn't do it. Let's go back to the Chassidus. No, it's machmir only chatchila b'ktzad hilchos Pesach, the chametz. Let's go back to the Chassidus. Yeah, so back to Sif Nun Daled, the first paragraph which we went through. So we said, Alter Rebbe says, "V'asur lo lishtamesh b'mikchoy oy laskiroi kol zman shaloi pedona moicher." You can't use it or rent it out because it's ribis gemura. Now the Alter Rebbe, I mentioned Alter Rebbe usually when it's ribis deraisa, Alter Rebbe writes ribis gemura shel Torah. If you look in the Hilchos Ribis, when it's avak ribis, he writes avak ribis. A few places Alter Rebbe writes ribis gemura, doesn't write shel Torah, doesn't write avak ribis. This is one of the places. In other words, Alter Rebbe leaves it hanging. Maybe it's deraisa, maybe it's not. Soon later we're going to see that Alter Rebbe seems to imply that it is deraisa, safek deraisa. Personally, I think that it might be similar to what Rabbi Kiva Eger's understanding over here is. It's ribis gemura, which could end up turning into ribis deraisa, ribis tzutza down the line, that's ribis gemura. But right now, it's ribis gemura, but not deraisa. That's how I understand this one. Now, Alter Rebbe then continues. Here the Alter Rebbe puts it down. V'hu shalekeach kibel olav t'nai zeh. There's only if the lekeach accepted upon himself this t'nai, but toiras chiyuv gomor, as a full and complete chiyuv. What does chiyuv gomor mean? The Alter Rebbe redefines everything. It's not about the seller making the deal. It's not about the buyer making the deal. It's not about the buyer making a deal and the seller agreeing. It's that he accepted b'teiras chiyuv gomor be'inyan sha'amoicher yochel isboya bedin l'kufay l'hachzir l'mimkarei. It's if it's done in such a way that it could be taken back from him in Bezdin, and it's also. If he did not accept this Tanai as a chiyuv, which means he did not accept it in such a way that it could be retroactively cancelled, even though he gave him a promise, I will give it back to you. But it was done midai teretzainoi. But you cannot force him in Bezdin to give back the land. It's not enough of a Tanai to undo the Mekach, which means maybe it's not a full Tanai, it's a partial Tanai. Yeah? It's still something you have to fulfill, like the Bes Yosef and the Smeses. You still might have to fulfill it. But it's not a Tanai Gomor to Mevatel HaMekach ve'en bo zeh mishum ribis. And therefore, it doesn't have a shaila of ribis. Atkan pretty much fits with the Mechaber. Now the Alter Rebbe goes, and much more machmir than until now. Yesh ha'imrim, there are those that say, shekol shenikar midas ha'moicher. As long as you can tell and you can identify the das ha-moicher is that he wants to go back to what he sold, and that is why he sold it to him. Even if the lekech did not accept as a chiyuv gamur, which means it cannot be taken in bezdin. He didn't even give him a promise. He just told him something which could be understood that he's going to give it back to him. The seller relied on it. And based on that, he did the sale. Because you see from his das that he's willing, that he wants to go back to it. You could see from his das. Therefore, it's not considered a mecher gamur. It's not considered a complete sale, even though there was no deal made. There was no tanai, there was no aftacha, there was only half a word from the lekech that maybe implies that. Or the seller's das, you could see from it that he's doing it. And therefore, yesh bozeh, it's a halva, v'yesh bozeh mishum ribis gemura, and it's considered ribis gemura, v'yesh lachush ladivreim lahachmir b'shel Torah. And you have to be choishesh to be machmir b'shel Torah. Suddenly over here, lahachmir b'shel Torah. So maybe the Alter Rebbe holds that it is deraisa. And this is on the second one. Now, who's the Yeshayimrim? So you look in the footnote, he sends you to Knesset Agdela. Really, it's also in Shardeya over here in Yeridei. You'll see it. There's later Poiskim Mishdud. You look in Knesset Agdela, on Yeridei, in Siman Kufayin Daled, Hagoy Satur Ois Daled. Over there, the Knesset Agdela brings in the Marashdam that when you do the first case that we mentioned, that you sell it on condition you're going to get it back, is also midiraisa, if you eat any fruits. In Ois Ches, the Knesset Agdela brings from his Rebbe a very interesting lashon, a tshuva. And he says, if im hadover yodua, it's known, if it's known, doesn't say if it was a deal, doesn't say anything, im yodua, it's known, that whenever the seller is going to want to do it, yachzir ma'osav, he'll give back his money v'yikachas shaloi, and he'll take back his field. Ribis shel teirahi, it's ribis deiraisa, v'yoytze b'dayanim, you take it b'dayanim. So it's just as Yodua. Yodua, this could be the source of the Alter Rebbe. It's Yodua. It's as long as Yodua. Obviously, you could also be medayik from the Ramah also. The Alter Rebbe may want to take the sweat of the Ramah in Yeridei. And the Ramah says that if it's known in town, al das kein machar, which means that you have to see what the logic is. But it's only if the minhag medina is. The Knesset Agdela goes weiter and says in the name of his Rebbe, as long as Yodua. Yeah, so as long as there's a yediyah, even without it tonight, it's already enough to make it. The Alter Rebbe says, yesh lahachmir, shel Torah. Maybe it's based on this Knesset Agdela. Again, why? You could still explain that the reason Alter Rebbe doesn't say Rebbe Skemuru shel Torah, it says shel hachmir b'shel Torah, is because, like Rebbe Akiva Eiger, like I said, it could turn into a deraisa down the line. The Alter Rebbe then continues in the next one. And here the Alter Rebbe says even stronger. V'cheinim alekeach masna. Lekeach makes it t'nai. Again, the Alter Rebbe just says makes it t'nai, no kinyan, no nothing. Shem yirtze lehachze lemikche la'achar zman. That if he would want to give him back, that means the lekeach now is making it t'nai. That if I'm going to want to give you back the field down the line, you return me the money. Means he's not saying if you're going to want to do it. The Lokech is not making it tonight. If you're going to want to do it, then I will agree with you. He says no. I'm making a deal for my benefit. That if I'm going to want to refund it down the line, I should be able to refund it and take the money back. Ein ze mecher gomel. It's not a complete sale. Also, lekech lehanis v'mikcha mishum ribis, and lekech is usher to have any enjoyment from it because of chashash ribis. It means here you have the lekech. He's making the deal for his own benefit. It's totally in him, and he could always say, "I don't want to return the field," because he makes. If I want to return it, I'm going to get back the money. And Alter Rebbe still says it's chashash ribis, and it's usher. And it's very hard to find any mocker. I didn't see anybody that says it. And if you look over here, interestingly, there's no mocker. There's no footnote on this statement. Look in the Alter Rebbe. The Bet 11 didn't put any maramokim for this one. There's nobody from before the Alter Rebbe for this thing. I didn't find anybody. You could medayik maybe from the Rambam, because the Rambam holds that the Tnai that the Lekeach makes not between Mil Be'alma. You could argue about that. You could try and find a svara for the Alter Rebbe. After the Alter Rebbe, there are Chassidische Poskim that hold like that. That paskin, I think, I forgot who was, maybe the Hari B'Samim. There are Chassidische Poskim which paskin like the Alter Rebbe. Not everybody brings it in the name of the Alter Rebbe, but there are people that paskin like that. But before the Alter Rebbe, I still did not find anybody that holds. The only way you could explain the logic of the Alter Rebbe is based on what's written until now. The Alter Rebbe basically says we're not looking at the people, and this seems pretty clear from the whole sif. We're not looking at the people. We're looking at the transaction. Is the transaction a complete transaction? You could have whatever you want. You could enjoy, you could sell, you could rent, whatever you want. If the transaction has a potential of being retracted, whether the transaction is going to be retracted because you made a deal mechatchila, whether the transaction is going to be retracted because the seller made a commitment, a promise, or whether the transaction is going to be retracted because the seller, because the buyer offers it and the seller agrees to it, or the buyer himself makes a deal for his own benefit, it's always us. That's the simple logic that the Alter Rebbe follows over here in the beginning of Sif Nun Daled and in the beginning of Sif Nun Hey. The second half of Sif Nun Daled is a different logic. It depends on Das HaMoicher. But the first half of Sif Nun Daled and the first half of Sif Nun Hey seems to have a kav. We look at the kinyan. We look at the potential for this sale to be retracted. Then the Alter Rebbe in the end of Sif Nun Hey continues and says about someone who sells and doesn't pay everything. We're not going to get into it now. Let's skip to Sif Nun Vav. Sif Nun Vav says the Alter Rebbe as follows: V'chein hamoicher al Tanai. Here we're not talking about the Tanai of refunding. We're talking about Stam Mechira al Tanai. Al Tanai there's going to be rain, Al Tanai is not going to be rain, Al Tanai I'm going to have kids, Al Tanai I'm going to do this, Al Tanai I'm going to do that, whatever it is.
Tanai that doesn't have to do with the actual sales?
Yeah. So Tanai that doesn't have to do with the refunding of the sale or money. Yeah. It's the Lekeach is not allowed to enjoy or benefit from the house yasne imay, unless the deal is structured in such a way that you tell him that if the Tnai is not going to be fulfilled, and therefore the Mekach is going to be cancelled, and therefore the Moicher is going to refund him the money, you'll deduct from it rental for the amount of time. And that pretty much covers almost all the time. This is based on the Tazan Yeridei. Yeah, basically you make a Tanai milchatchila that all the enjoyment that I'm going to have from this field and all the revachim I'm going to have from this field will be deducted from the refund down the line. That means, yes, there's a refund option, but the refund option has a clause that you only have to refund me the balance. So let's say I sell you a house with the Tanai. And then I make in the deal a t'nai, I make as part of the t'nai a second half to the t'nai. If I could always buy it back. But when I'll buy it back, I'm going to refund you the money, but I'm going to deduct whatever, it's $2,000 for every month that you're living there. Then it covers most of the t'naim. Why? Because you have a t'nai on the t'nai. You have a t'nai that, whatever it is, that it's a t'nai is going to rent, and it's not going to rent, whatever it is. But you have another t'nai that until the mekach is confirmed as valid, the usage is not considered ribis because it's always going to be deducted. This only works for all t'naim which have a time limit. For example, is it going to rain by tomorrow? Is it going to rain next week? I'm going to go to Eretz Yisrael. I'm not going to go to Eretz Yisrael. Or if I think it might even work for mechire al t'nai that he could get it back in 4 years, because there is a time frame by when the t'nai is going to expire and the mechire is going to become real. And at that point we could say the 4 years are over or the rain didn't come. Well, let's make a cheshbon. The t'nai wasn't his batel, the money is going to give back. Let's see how many days passed. But in the second case, the stricter case, where the Alter Rebbe is machmer both ends mitzad the peiros, but we're asking if this solves the problem. But in the case when I say whenever I'll have money, I'll give it back to you, that means that there's never an ending time for the t'nai. Why is there never ending time for the t'nai? You already learned in the Reish Zayin. If I make a t'nai and then a t'nai and with somebody, and that somebody passes away, it goes down to his kids, and on both sides. So t'nai could say le'olam vad. So therefore, since there will never be his barerus and his barer that the mecher was completed or not, so you'll never be able to deduct the rent. If you're never going to be able to deduct the rent, you'll never have, this t'nai will never work to avoid the issue of ribis. With that we conclude the Alter Rebbe, relevant to this nekuda. Now it's 1:30, I want to take a short break. I've already been speaking for almost an hour. I'll give you breathing time. And then we're going to move on to the Tzemach Tzedek, Siman Reish Tzedek Dal, which is the next thing in this booklet. We'll go to Tzemach Tzedek, then we'll circle back to a few more nekudas in the Reish Zayin. Summarize the tshuva. Al dvar habayis o eitzim, a house for storage of wood, or a house made from wood. Shekana Rab Yoina ve Rab Shimon. Yoina bought from Shimon b'shtar v'kesef. The property was sold, was bought with a shtar and with money. Uboy b'yoyim on the same day. Also, Rab Yoina made him a shtar b'chazor el Rab Shimon. Made him a second shtar. When you'll refund me the money, I'll refund you the house. And no kinyan is mentioned in the second shtar. 4 years later, you're going to see later from the tshuva, it's 4 years. Rab Shimon comes with a bag of cash to Rab Yoina and says, here's the money, give me back my field. Rab Yoina says, I don't have to give you back the field. There was no kinyan for the second shtar, and therefore, without a kinyan, I had no obligation and no way of enforcing it, and therefore, stam shtosim, this whole second shtar is worthless. Reb Shimon says, no, from the beginning of the deal, before I even sold you the field, we spoke about that this is going to be like that. Afterwards, we made a second shtar. Another taina of Reb Shimon. The gam b'shtar zeh dai she'ischayev lahachzir loy. The shtar is enough. You don't need a kinyan. The shtar is enough for it. Gam also Reb Shimon teveya mimenu schirus avur haklait shelo dalet shonim. He's demanding from him rent. He says, I'm going to refund you the money, deducting 4 years rent for usage of this house. Because I'm giving you back the money. Because I'm giving you back the money, it's not really a sale. And when you used it, it became ribis ktsutza. Any money now that I'm returning it to you, it becomes ribis ktsutza. Again, similar logic of a kiva eger. And it's yetzer b'dayanim. That is the question. It came to the Tzemach Tzedek, what to do with this thing. And the Tzemach Tzedek takes apart this whole story and deals with every element of it. The original sale, the Tanai when it was done, the second shtar is valid, the kinyan, who has a cheskas morakama, do you have to pay the rent, do you don't have to pay the rent, do you have to refund the field, all that is being discussed in this tshuva. I'm going to summarize it to you. Because I'm going to read it inside, it will be a full day. So obviously the Tzemach Tzedek begins with the Gemara, that is the yesod of the halachas that we learned in Siman Reish Zayin, and we learned in Siman Kofayin Dalad in Yeridea. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, it's mashma from the Gemara, the kol heicha shalekeach bal korcha yitzarech lehachzir lav mecheru. Similar to the way the Alter Rebbe says it. The Tzemach Tzedek does not mention Alter Rebbe anywhere in this tshuva, just by the way. But he says mashma from the Gemara, that anywhere where the leikeach is going to be forced in Bezdin to refund the field for whatever reason, based on the deal, based on the shtar, whatever it is, it's not considered a mecher. Then the Tzemach Tzedek continues more and he says, even if the leikeach himself, afterwards, after the first sale was completed, but he actually made a kinyan for it. So here's where he differs from Alter Rebbe a little bit, because Alter Rebbe says hisno without saying kinyan. But over here he says if he made a tanai, even the tanai was done after the first sale was fully completed, then the lekeach offers a tanai, but he does a tanai with a kinyan. And the kinyan is so strong that then Bezdin is going to be forced to give it back. Lav mecheru. It's not considered a sale. Why? He explains because being that he could force him in Bezdin to give him back the field and to fulfill the Tanai and give back the field, it makes no difference who makes the Tanai. Whether the buyer, whether the seller, still remains a chashash ribis. As long as there is a deal over here that's made, that whether by the seller or by the buyer or either of them, which will trigger a psak bezdin to fulfill it, it's the chashash of ribis. And even though it's a complete mechireh, Tzemach Tzedek says, being that afterwards you made a shtar, v'kinyan, hagoyrem, that causes, sheyuchali esad echad beribis, that creates a scenario which could potentially bring a tzad echad beribis, that means a ribis which could down the line happen, hareza aser, it's aser.
So in this case, how much percent would it be interest?
It's not percentage of interest, it's how much, it's based on how much you used it, whatever the rental is. So if you sold it to him at value, sold him a house for $2 million, big house in Crown Heights. Then after 4 years you want to take it back with whichever deal it was, then it's a big house, could be $5,000 a month rent.
That he's paying also.
No, he's not paying. Who's paying? The seller? The buyer is not paying anything. But when the buyer gets the money refunded to him, he's going to get deducted to prevent ribis, those $5,000 a month for the 5 years he was there. 60 months, so it's $5,000. Huh? Yeah. So Tzedek pretty much same thing. The only difference in Tzedek is the Alter Rebbe just says hisna, and Tzedek says bigger kinyan. Then Tzemach Tzedek goes and says why you cannot go with the logic that if the lekeach does it from his own accord, it's mutter, like we saw from the Rambam and in the Torah to a certain degree, and why you can't say that a Tanai after sale is also mutter. And Tzemach Tzedek says it's clear that as long as the Tanai is enforceable in Bezdin, it automatically, there's the Isur of Ribis is automatically there. And even though, according to the Beis Yosef's understanding in the Rambam, it's not Aser, Tzemach Tzedek goes through a whole list and makes every Paisik, says Reva Paiskim disagree with him. And he says, according to most Paiskim, Yesh Boze Isur Ribis. There is Isur Ribis, regardless if the Meicher or the Lekeach do it. As long as the Tanai is a Tanai, doesn't make a difference who initiated it, Yesh Boze Isur Ribis. Even if the shtar is made afterwards. And why is that? And here, Tzemach Tzedek jumps to the other logic when it comes to that. Not only because it could be taken in Bezdin. Why? Because the intention of this of the moicher is that there should not be a complete sale here. That's the intention of the moicher. And we know that that's the intention of the moicher. Doesn't make, how do we know it? Because the kinyan was made, because the shtar was made. But we know, and this is like the second opinion in the Alter Rebbe, the more machmor, we know that's the intention. So it doesn't make a difference when it happened. There's a complete mechir, and then later this thing happened. It's still aser. And he says, and not only that, the Gedulei Truma explains the Rambam differently than the Beis Yosef. And according to Gedulei Truma, it will be aser. And according to Rashi and Baal Trumas and Tur and Trumas Hadeshen, all the Paiskim, almost all the Paiskim, this will be aser, regardless of how it is. And Geshmak to learn Tzemach Tzedek and says, not enough time. I don't want to go through everyone, but you should learn it yourself. The first chelik of the Tzemach Tzedek, where he explains all the Paiskim to fit into this. Then the Tzemach Tzedek then continues and says, it seems from the Rivash, that in this case, where you have a shtar and then a second shtar later, it's mamash ribis k'tzutza. That's the Tzemach Tzedek said. It seems like all Reva Paiskim would hold like that also. But he says, now Tzemach Tzedek comes and says, but l'maise the Shulchan Aruch paskent like the Beis Yosef, like the Shulchan Aruch paskent like his own understanding in the Rambam, the way he explained the Beis Yosef. So maybe Rabbi Yoina could come and say Kimli, like the Mechaber. Can't say Kimli against the Shulchan Aruch sometimes, but Kimli like the Shulchan Aruch. There's no, for sure that he has such a possibility to say Kimli like the Shulchan Aruch, even though it's against Reva Paiskim. At least that he shouldn't have to pay the rent. He shouldn't lose the percentage of rent. And why does he have a right to say Kimli, says Tzemach Tzedek? Because he's muchzak. The buyer is muchzak. Why is he muchzak? A, he uses it for this amount of time. B, he's sitting in there. So he's a muchzak. So comes to Tzemach Tzedek, says, no, not so fast. He's not so fast that he's a muchzak. You want to say he's a muchzak, in Hilchas Ribis, there are cases when the loive, when the malve is a muchzak in something of the loive, but it's not when there's ribis k'tzutza. When there's a shaila of ribis k'tzutza and it becomes a suffix deiraisa, then the usage that you use this, you use the chalei kadin. And if you use the chalei kadin, or at least a suffix deiraisa, if you use the chalei kadin, so then your whole usage milchatchila was wrong. And you want to base your chazaka on the wrong usage, it doesn't work. You're not a muchzak. Safek muchzak. So therefore, maybe there should be a cheskas morakama, the original seller. So then he says, okay, let's leave it at morakama. But we have a problem. What's the problem? We all agree that there was a complete sale here in the beginning. The first shtar was a complete sale. So if the first shtar was a complete sale, and now we have a shaila on the usage, so the chazaka should be in the Baal Shtar, the one who has a shtar that proves that he bought it. Why? When was the suffix created? After the second shtar, not after the first shtar. First shtar happened, the buyer became the muchzak, became the owner. Then they wrote a second shtar which created a suffix of ribis k'tzutza. So the suffix was the noilad, the suffix was noilad only after the second shtar. After the first chazaka was established. So therefore the chazaka should be back to the buyer. So Tzemach Tzedek says, no, okay, you want to say chazaka? Chazaka, fine. I have a different problem. there's a shach at the end of Siman Kuf Ayin Dala, end of Ilchis Ribis, where the shach says that in any place where it's a suffix, if it's avak ribis or ribis ktsutza, because avak ribis is not yotze b'dayonim, ribis ktsutza is yotze b'dayonim. Comes to Machzedek and says if you have a suffix, if it's ribis ktsutza or avak ribis, you have a case which is not clear if it's deraisa derabanan, you take it out of his hands, even though he's a muhzuk. So here the Tzemach Tzedek says, being that it's ribis ktsutza according to Reva Poiskim, not like the Mechaber. So based on the Shach's logic, even if you convert it into a suffix, Moitzin miyadoi, and Moitzin miyadoi even if he's a halachic muhzak. So I don't care if he's a muhzak or not. You're still going to take the field out of his hands. And you're still going to take the rent out of him. Not only that, you want to say that the suffix only was created and was born after the second shtar. That's good. But the second shtar is what confirms that the karka goes back. So at the same time that you created a suffix on the ribis, on the rent, and you created a suffix on the chazaka, and you want to say maybe he's still a muhzak, that shtar confirms that is obligated to return it back to him. So even if he's not mitam muhzak, you still have to give him back the field. You still have to give him back his field because of the second shtar. And therefore, what would be the argument? Only on the refund of the rent. So muhzakus the koine doesn't have, based on the second shtar, or based on the suffix of ribis ktsutza, or based on shtam sheshalei kadin. So the only shaila you have is on the rent. So you want to say that the rent, you say kimli? He says maybe you could say kimli for the rent, but not for the returning the field. But returning the field you must do. And then Tzemach Tzedek concludes this specific section with an interesting svara. You want to use the second shtar to say that he's forced to give back the house, right? And therefore he's not a muhzak. And since he's not a muhzak, he has to give back the field and he has to lose his rent, because once he's no longer muhzak and he gives back the field, it becomes a v'sutza. The second shtar says that he has to give back the field and he gets back all the money. So you want to use the second shtar that he has to give back the field, use the second shtar all the way. The second shtar says he only has to give back the field if he gets back all the money. It's not in the catch-22. If he gives back all the money, he's ever ribis, maybe ribis ktsutza according to Tzemach Tzedek. But to give back the field, according based on the second shtar, you only have to do if you get back all the money. So we're back to being stuck here. Does he have to give back the field based on what? Maybe he's still the muhzak. That's what Tzemach Tzedek says. If you want to use a second shtar, you're still going to have this problem. So Tzemach Tzedek says no. Why? The second shtar has a date on it. And Zman is a shtar mechiach alav, and Zman is k'meyachshav. We already know that. So now, being the second shtar has a Zman in it, and every shtar with Zman is like meyachshav. So became a chiyuv to return the house because the shtar has a zman which made it meyachshav. So the kinyan already retroactively happened, and therefore you have to give back the field because there's already kinyan meyachshav. In this true that Tzemach Tzedek doesn't say like a svara in Piskedinim that you could say meyachshav on the t'nai but not on the sale. He just says, no, you say me'achshav, the shtar is a shtar, it's me'achshav, and the shtar of the t'nai made a kinyan on the karka. So therefore, returning the field you must, because there was a kinyan me'achshav. Elamai, only a shtar if you have to give back the rent or not. So then Tzemach Tzedek says, okay, fine. So you want to say that the shtar is me'achshav. But now, how did the shtar kick in? There was no kinyan. The same shtar we had in Piskedinim. You say it's me'achshav, but there was no kinyan in the shtar, and that's a taina of Rabbi Yoina. So he says, well, talking about karkois. In karkois, the halacha is that a karka is nikne b'shtar, like in kinyan, k'may b'kinyan. And therefore, you don't need a kinyan. Shtar is enough. So here comes Tzemach Tzedek with the logic of the Piskedinim. He says, a shtar works to be koine karka when you're koine the karka. Over here, the shtar is on the eschayvos, not on the kinyan, not on the mechira of karka. On the eschayvos to give it. So if the shtar is on the eschayvos, that he's going to give him back the field, you need a kinyan for what you're going to do. And there's no kinyan. So then he says, no, because it's like me'achshav. Back to there's a Zman on the shtar, it's me'achshav. And being that it's me'achshav, the shtar is not a shtar eschayvos, it's a shtar mechira, shtar kinyan. And the shtar kinyan works for karkoes. And what's the proof? The lashon of the Gra in Yeredeya. It's in your booklet. The second page of the Shulchan Aruch that I printed for you. There's a Gra over here, the Gra Sifkot Mches. It's on Sif Beis. What's on Sif Beis? The Mechaber over there says that if I sell you a field on Monday, and on the same day I made a kinyan with the seller, the buyer made a kinyan. It means first I sold it to you Monday morning, and I wrote to you a shtar. Then you, the same day, made another shtar to me, which says that if I'm going to give you back the money, then you'll give me back the shtar mechira. And the Mechaber says if the Tanai was done before the mechira, it's like alva, you're not allowed to eat the peiros. But if your Tanai with me was done after the mechira, then it's mutter, it's mecher gomer, it's considered like a stam chesed. And this comes the Gra and writes in Sifkot and Ches. This is based on the Pirush Rabbeinu Hananel, that he says, and then you look in Agoras Ashri, it says, Masha Kosav Sham Agoras Ashri. This is the second to last line of the first column of Agoras Abir Agra. Masha Kosav Sham Agoras Ashri, Vehu de Koni Chulu. He says, when Agoras Ashri says that you made the second shtar, is Vehu de Koni, when you made a kinyan, Ritzoynei Loimar, She'oso kinyan or shtar. He made a kinyan or a shtar. Tzemach Tzedek uses these three words. She'oso kinyan or shtar from the Gra. It says based on the Gra, She'oso kinyan or shtar. For this is a raya that a shtar that you use in this scenario for a future transfer of the property. You don't need a specific kinyan. Kinyan or shtar. Either or will work. And it becomes alva. And therefore, he's mechuyev to give it back to him. And then the Tzemach Tzedek continues and says, and mistame, probably, they spoke and they agreed and they solved everything beforehand, before the original sale. And therefore, you don't need b'chlal, the second shtar. The agreement was like that. And the kinyan, he says the kinyan that you made on the original kinyan for selling the karka, being that it was probably done after this conversation of this going back, so that one kinyan covers two deals. Covers the sale and covers the future commitment. Even though you did not say at the kinyan of the sale that it includes the deal also. And therefore you have to give back the land. And because you must give back the land, you must also deduct the rent, because otherwise it's a risk tzutza. And if he says, and if one of them is going to deny and say there was no Tanai before, or if the buyer is going to say, no, we didn't speak about the Tanai before, so therefore there's no kinyan, so it's chayav shvuah. And then the Tzemach Tzedek says, okay, you want to say that it wasn't done before? Fine, it was done after. But it was done b'dibur that brought the shtar. And even if it was done afterwards, it's still chashash ribis. Because it was done afterwards, like Tzemach Tzedek explains, it makes no difference. Once you commit yourself, there's a chashash ribis. Therefore, you have to deduct the rent. And Tzemach Tzedek says, especially if both shtaros are on the same day, when both shtaros are the same day, you can't know what came first, what came second, and therefore the karka remains a cheskas morakama. And even if you're able to prove that the second shtar was written after the first shtar on the same day, you still chayav to give back the land, and therefore you have to deduct the rent. By the way, this is what I'm going to be talking about from the Tzemach Tzedek. Now, let's mention a few small points, and then we'll finish this topic. The tshuva from the Maranach, Chelik Aleph Siman Kuf Vav, which is brought in the same Shulchan Aruch that you have over here in the Yeredeya, and the Oitzer Mefarshim. One second. Yeah, in the second page that I printed from the Shulchan Aruch, in the Oitzar Mefarshim on the second column, where it says Mochar Karka. No, not Mochar Karka, 1 second. Where is it? No, it's not here, it's somewhere else. I mixed up. So Maranach and Chelek Aleph Siman Kovav says if somebody sells with a shtar, and then afterwards he writes a second shtar with this deal, and then the buyer, during the time, let's say he sells it to him for 4 years, and he writes a second shtar that the sale is for 4 years, and you're going to return it to me at the end of 4 years. And during the 4 years the buyer goes and sells it to another party. He says, obviously, Karav Levada, he says that the second sale is invalid. It's betela. And that fits with the Tzemach Tzedek a little bit, that you could, even if you have a complete mechira from the beginning, and you have a second shtar afterwards, the second shtar could completely undo the first one. Now let's go into a few nekudas I want to bring from the Knesset Agdela, Mata Shimon, and that's pretty much it. The Knesset Agdela, Nagoy Satur Ois Pei Gimel. In Choshen Mishpat says, if there's a machlekes between the buyer and the seller, this is not directly connected to Tzemach Tzedek, just connected to the topic. If there's a machlekes between the buyer and the seller, the buyer, this is down the line. There was a deal and everything was done, everything is sealed and everything is perfect, it was all Baal Peh. The moicher says, I gave you back the money, give me back my field. The koine says, never got back the money. The Rashba says, he brings in the Rashba, Knesset Agdela and Ois Pei Gimel brings in the Rashba, that the moicher is the one who's obligated to bring proof that he actually paid. In other words, who's the muhzak? The koine. Because otherwise the koine would have to bring the proof. So when you have such a deal, the koine is the muhzak, which is not like a Tzemach Tzedek says. Now, Nagoyes Beis Yosef Ois Kuf Yud Zayin of the Knesset Agdela, he says, this is even more than the Tzemach Tzedek. He says, the muhzak cannot say Kimli according to the Rambam Beshitas Beis Yosef. He brings from the Ranach, that's the way that the Beis Yosef explains the Rambam is a pirush dochok. Fakvetch the pirush. Pirush dochok, you can't say Kimli on the pirush dochok of the Beis Yosef and the Rambam. And he brings also from the Marashdam, Marashach, Marasasan, and a bunch of other ones that you cannot say Kimli like the Rambam in this scenario. Tzemach Tzedek is arguing, could you say Kimli like the Mechaber, like the Rambam or not? Maranach says clearly you can't say Maranach, Marashdam, all say clearly you can't say Kimli like the Rambam. And there was Sfadim, and Knesset Agdela is the biggest one on Kimli like the Mechaber. And here he says you can't say Kimli. Mate Shima in Agoy Satur Oislam at Gimel on Choshen Mishpat brings from the Knesset Agdela in Yeridea, which we already mentioned, that something was sold in a way where the Knesset Agdela's Rebbe Sheyodua, that it's known that the Moicher didn't wanted to sell in this way, and he brings Poiskim Lakan or Lakan. The Mata Shimon seems to imply that it's mutter. He disagrees that it's not considered the Asr, it's not considered as Gemurah if it's only Yodua without a clear Tanai. As opposed to the Knesset Agdela, who obviously follows his Rebbe and frames the paragraph in such a way that it's mashma that he's not to be Asr. Now, in Mata Shimon Sifkat Lamed Daled brings from a Sefer Pnei Moshe that if you want to be Mekel and you want to allow for such a Tanai to be valid, the Pnei Moshe says the Tanai, the Shtar Tanai has to be written 2 or 3 or even 10 days after the Shtar Mechira. Not on the same day. Why? To show that he is the one that it came from the koine, not from the moicher. And it also proves that it wasn't done the same day. The fact that you had to write a shtar 10 days later means that 10 days later the Lekech came up with an idea. If it's in the same day, it says Manish Shtar Mechiach, they're both in the same day, and that's it. No, Tzemach Tzedek says no nafkamina, it doesn't make a difference when, as long as the Tanai is done. Even if it could be if the Tanai was done a year later, according to Tzemach Tzedek, it's still a problem. Just the shaila is the only nafkamina would be how much schiris you have to pay. But the Tanai is, as long as the Tanai is enforceable in Bezdin. But the Pnei Moshe says it really boils down to showing whether the Lekech is the one who created it, based on the based on the Turin and the Rosh or not. Then the Matashimon brings in the Mabit that even in the same day it works as long as it's clear that it came from the Lekeach. As long, and this is pretty much the same as the Mechaber over here, as long as it's clear that it wasn't the Moicher who did it, it's Lekeach who did it, and that it was done after the original sale. And he proves it from the Rashba. The Mabit proves from the Rashba. Comes the Matashimon and says, this Rashba is a powerful Raya. How did the Pnei Moshe ignore the Rashba? He suddenly, the Rashba disappeared from him. So he says, we could argue that the Pnei Moshe understands the Rashba, that the second shtar clearly, even though it's in the same day, has a clear time on it. They wrote the hour, so that way you're able to prove which one was done first, which one was done second. He says, maybe. But he says, no, according to Pnei Moshe, that's not going to work anyways. Why? Because according to the Pnei Moshe, as long as it was done close enough to the sale, we say it was all one package deal. I don't care if you wrote the second shtar after the first shtar. As long as it's done around the same time, it's proof that it was all part of the same deal. The only way it doesn't work, the only way you could do it, we have to ensure that it wasn't done b'shas ha'mechira. So for that, to be able to prove that it was not done b'shas ha'mechira, and to be able to confirm that it was done mitzad lakeach, has to be done a few days later. And he says, Lachas kam v'kama, there are certain opinions that say you could write it in the same shtar. Right, the first paragraph you sold it, and then afterwards lakeach says kach v'kach in the same shtar. The Matashimon says it wouldn't work, and the Pnei Moshe for sure it wouldn't work. Yeah. Now, the Pnei Moshe is a different tshuva. The Matashimon also brings that if you wrote the same one shtar, but 10 days later, that means on Monday, on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, I sold the field. On Yud Beis Shvat, and there was no shtar. It was a Kenyan money. On Yud Beis Shvat comes the Lekeach and writes a new shtar, the only shtar. Or the Moicher and the Lekeach write a shtar, and the shtar says, on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, the property was purchased. You have a date on it. You have a date on it. And today Yud Beis Shvat, the Lekeach came to the Moicher and said, I'm giving you this offer. The Pnei Moshe says, it's also, even though it was in the same shtar, it doesn't make a difference how long afterwards it was done. It's clearly a harame from Ribis. It's clear that their whole intention was only to avoid Ribis and to really consider it alva, and therefore I don't care how long afterwards it's written. If it's written in the same shtar, it's a proof that it's a harama. Now in Ois Nun Gimel, the Matashimon discusses the smeh that we learned, that the smeh makes a differentiation between mechira l'zman and mechira without a time, which we also see the Alter Rebbe seems to follow it in Luchas Pesach. And the Matashimon that goes b'seis Ois Nun Gimel goes through, brings all the poskim who disagree on the smeh and says you can't rely on the smeh for that. He even says that it's clear that the smeh didn't see, I forgot which sefer he mentions, the Matashimon says, sefer that explains why it's not shaykh, and if the smeh would see the sefer, he would for sure not write such a thing. Then the last thing is something which is taka in the Oitzah Mefarshim, in Yeridea, which is in the second page of the Shulchan Aruch. The second paragraph is from the Eish Avram, the Buchacher, on Ois Beis. He says somebody gave presents to Kailul of the town, the Kailul of town. So because he gave presents to the Kailul of town, the Tuva Yoir, the Vadakol of town, goes to this guy and tells him, you know, you've been a good benefactor for our local Kailuls. We're committing to give you a stipend every month for the rest of your life. Now ends up being that he gave $100,000 to Kailul, but he's going to be making $1,000 a month now. Until the end of his life, the $100,000 he gave to Kailul are turning into $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. The Eish Avram says Ribis Gomor. He brings from the Marit. He brings from the Marit, it's Ribis Gomor. It's clearly not. This is not a deal. He didn't give him a tana, and they're not giving him a stipend. He gave a loan to the Vadakol to pay for the Kailul, and for that they're paying him with ribis. They only called it, you gave us a matana, we'll give you a stipend. That's not how it works. He says in matana is bottle, they have to give back the money to him, and he cannot take a penny from it. And they have to give him everything, and you have to deduct everything that he. If you want to give him, you have to deduct what he. You have to make a cheshbon to work out. There's no deal. By the way, there's a lot more to talk about this topic, but we spoke way too long, and the next year is going to be on a different topic. Hashem, Hatzlacha.